Hello guys, my name is Lucas and welcome to a new episode of our Fixed Perspective Scroller. In today's episode, I'm going to show you how to make a dialog box for the NPC that we made on the last episode. And also I'm going to be working a little bit on the input controller or input manager. So I'm going to show you the input manager and then I'm going to show you the dialog box and just try to explain a little bit how I made those. So first of all, I made a game object in our scene called managers, which is going to hold all the master classes of our game. So for instance, it's going to hold the dialog manager, the input manager, and the UI controller. The UI controller used to be in the canvas, so you can take that from the canvas and put it in manager. And of course you have to edit the UI controller script. Pretty simple things like let me open that UI controller. But before, to access the canvas, we just access the transform of whatever is holding this class, because that was the canvas. But now since we put it into the managers object, this one here, managers, we need to find that object and set it as the canvas. And we also need a static function, a static class. So in the instance, I think we already had that one. And then later, for example, in player controller, instead of finding the UI controller instance transform, we change it to the canvas, and we are accessing the transform of the canvas. So it's something pretty simple. Okay, so now I'm going to explain to you my input manager. And what the input manager does is it has an instance of itself, and it's a public static, so we can access this instance from anywhere. And it's going to have a bunch of events, so I call them input event. And this input event, for example, we could have on press up, we could have on press up, on press down, we could have some events called on tap. So for example, on tap, which means we press down and we press up very quickly within a threshold, within a for example 0.2 seconds. And then we will create our input here. So for example, if I get the mouse button up, I'm going to call on press up, and this is going to do something. So all the classes, instead of all having their own update waiting for something to happen, so instead of checking on every class their update to see if there's a input.get mouse button up, I'm just going to subscribe the functions of my other classes to this event, and they will just listen for this event. And the only class that is going to be constantly running the update and listening for the mouse button up and mouse button down event is going to be the input manager. So it's going to make things a lot more cleaner for us, and even can save us some performance. Now that I have this, you can copy mine here. We have this on press up event. And what we want to do is create a dialog manager that will show a dialog whenever we press up on our NPCs. So before we go and create the dialog manager class, we need to make a dialog box in our canvas. So before, we used to have the character info. I changed the name. I think it was used to be called background. And I have character info, which you can see I turn off and on. And we have a dialog box, which I set here down the bottom, just under the feet of our character, and I added some text inside. So you could have some other things. So for example, I have just the text, but you could have some frame, some background texture that changes. Maybe we will add some buttons in the future, so the player can choose what to reply to the characters. But we can add those details in the future. So now that we have a dialog box within our canvas, we can actually make a dialog manager. So as this is a manager, I'm also going to create a static instance for that, so we can access this instance from other classes easier. And I'm going to also make a transform, which is reference to the dialog box transform, and also a text called dialog box text body. So this is going to be a reference to the text within the dialog box. On start, I'm just going to set those two variables. My update is not doing anything, so I'm just going to delete that. And we have three functions. One function is called print on dialog box, and it has a parameter of he has a string parameter. So what this does, we just found the box, we set it active, we change the text to whatever we want to show, and then we add the close dialog box callback to the onPressUp event in our input manager. So this will be called on a onPressUp event. So after we run it and we add it to the pressup event, so you might be thinking, oh, if I add this close dialog box callback to the pressup function, I'm going to press and it's going to be closed immediately by itself. Well, no, because you call this and then you add this. So because you already call this and then you add it, it's not going to be this function here, this close dialog box, is not going to be called until the next press up, right? Because you already called the input manager on press up event. So we have two other functions. So one is a close dialog box, and this simply turns the dialog box off. And we have another one called close dialog box callback, which is actually closing the dialog box, but at the same time it's removing itself from the event. So after we press up and we close it, it's going to remove itself, so at the next time it's not going to be called twice because we keep adding it to the onPressUp event. So we just add it here and remove it on itself. It will remove itself from the event after it's called. So where do we actually call this? Right now I'm just calling here when we used to talk with the NPC that was in the player controller. So you remember from the last episode, something here, get input. So here, and I changed the input in our player. Instead of, we used to have get mouse button down, but I prefer to do it on button up because of when it appears. I want to show it once the character releases the mouse click instead of when it just press it down. The NPC controller, and instead of doing print something, I just do show dialog. So we go to the declaration of the show dialog, yeah, and here. Before here, we used to have just a print and print whatever the dialog was supposed to be. Right now we're going to use the dialog manager's instance to print something on the dialog box. And here, if the dialog index is greater than the dialog length -1, what we're going to do is close the dialog box and set the dialog index to the dialog length -2. So this is going to leave us right on the last piece of dialogue of the character. So for example, we have 3 dialogues, so we go all the way 1, 2, and 3. So once it's 3, this is always going to be true, right? So we want to subtract 2 so that the next time we're going to repeat the 3rd dialogue again. So something like that. You can try the math yourself. You can try -1 and -2 and see what happens. So that's pretty much what I did. So now if I turn this dialog box off and I just play this, and I'm going to show you the witch doctor, which is our NPC. I'm going to show it to you in the debug mode, so you can see the dialogues, the dialog index, and what happens. So if I walk right a little bit and I click on the witch doctor, hi, nice day we have. So I can click outside, and as you saw here, the dialog index increased by 1 because he already showed us this. If I click outside, it's going to close the dialog because we have an onPressUp event after that. So it's going to close the dialog box. And actually, every time I click on him again, it's going to close the box and turn it on again. So if I click on him, it's actually turning on the box, and it didn't have a close event because it removed itself from the onTouchUp event. So we just turn on the dialog box. Now if I click on him again and I release the mouse button, First, the dialog box was closed because there was an event set in the onTouchUp. The onTouchUp event wanted us to close the dialog box. But then because I click on him again, I also had to show the dialog again. So we show it and it increased the dialog index once again. So now we're in dialog index 3. And then if I talk with him again, it's going to show the box. And if I click outside, it's going to close the box. Or if I click anywhere, actually, it's going to close because we are triggering the input manager's onTouchUp event. So this is basically how I use the input manager and also how I use the dialog manager to show dialogues of our NPCs, maybe some dialogues from some monsters, so some mini boss or some boss is going to tell us something before fighting with us, and we also want to show that on the dialog box. So one more thing you would like to do is have because right now if I talk with him I can just walk away and the box is going to stay here. Usually games will have some option. Oh, glitch. Okay. Usually games will have some mechanism to lock the player while we're talking. So you could easily do that on the player controller. So you might have some boolean or some state machine that whenever the NPC here, the instance of the dialog manager, prints something on the dialog box, it could also access the class, the player class, and lock the players on place. So just set their booleans like they're locked or something, whatever you have. You can try that, you can play around with that. But I think that's pretty much the basics of our input controller and the basics of our dialog box. So we will add things in the future, of course, but right now we have what we need for this, and we're going to also talk about responsive UI on the next episode, and then we can finally start doing some quest and inventory and finish with this milestone B. So I'm very excited for that, guys. That's pretty much for today's video. If you like it, please leave a like, comment, subscribe to my channel. And I also want to give a very special thanks to the people who is supporting me on Patreon, because that really means a lot to me. It means that my effort is actually meaningful for you guys, and that just makes me very happy. So thank you again, and if you could help me on Patreon, that would mean a lot. I leave a link on the description. There's some cool perks you can browse, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye. Peace.